Today on Chatter That Matters, I want to embark on a journey of exploration, introspection, and I want to chase the answer for a single question, one that challenges our perceptions and assumptions. Is society putting up systemic barriers and holding back certain individuals, but in fact doing so, holding back all of society?
My brain is hooked up differently. It feels like I have good memories and I'm a best friend.
A daily battle with discrimination against an ableist system that does not want me around.
Autism means to me how I view the world and how I share my viewpoints and experiences with others, neurotypicals and neuroatypicals.
It means I see the world differently than others. I can see things that others may not. I want people to understand me. I struggle with relationships, but I still want the same things as others. A job, a girlfriend, and to live on my own someday.
Joining me today is a remarkable woman. Emma Beehler is an individual who's a world champion in cheerleading, a stellar student, musician, and cherished daughter. But she also has autism. And joining her today is her mom, Natalie, and her dad, Brian.
Every parent wants people to appreciate their children and to think they're amazing. And so it's really hard when someone doesn't. So you need to be prepared for that. It's going to happen because people don't necessarily understand how people on the spectrum think and act and that kind of thing. And they don't realize how amazing they are.
Emma, she's living testament to the extraordinary capabilities that are within all of us. Yet despite her undeniable achievements, she faces obstacles and prejudices that at times diminish her light, the zest and appetite for life. And as we travel with her and look at the world through her eyes, we're going to confront some uncomfortable truths about the barriers woven in how we think about certain people. You know, we say they have disabilities, they're different. This insidious undercurrent of ableism, our collective failure to embrace neurodiversity. But the more we learn about neurodiversity, the more we realize that some of the greatest inventions, innovations that stepped forwards in society have been people that we say are on the spectrum. I think you'll find Emma's journey is one of hope, and she's a beacon of resilience, illuminating the path towards a more inclusive and equitable future. And you're going to find a fighter who's not prepared to accept the status quo or the barriers society often puts up.
This is Chatter That Matters with Tony Chapman, presented by RBC.
Emma, Brian, and Natalie, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've never had a family on my show. I've had a daughter and father, but I've never had a family, so I'm quite excited how this is going to work out. And Brian and Natalie, I want to start with you. As parents, when did you start realizing that Emma had these unique gifts?
She's always been just intensely happy, intensely exuberant, intensely, everything about her was intense from the time she was born. Most of that time was joyful, happy, musical, active, everything. She learned to speak early. She learned to walk early. She was determined to do anything that she wanted to do. She was going to figure it out. But she was also very set in her ways. We would have so much trouble getting her to get dressed in the morning unless it was her choice of what she was going to wear, and it had to be a dress. For the longest time, she wouldn't wear anything around her waist. And if we moved something around in her room, she didn't like that. She would move it back. And she used to put things in baskets and carry them from one place to the next and then set them up and then put them back in the basket, carry it to another place, set it up again. It was very specific kind of play. And because we have a son who has autism, we already kind of knew what to look for. But the thing with Emma was that she was so sociable. We just saw some of the tendencies, but we didn't realize because she was so different from her brother.
And Emma, do you remember doing that? I mean, was that an early age where you sort of said, this is what's important to me? Or was it just, this is what a child does?
I don't really remember like a lot of that, but I know that I did it. I think that for me, that was just kind of the way I worked.
And when you started sort of making friends and such, did you feel that the way they played and you played were different? Or did you feel that you saw the world different?
I wanted things to be my way. And so when I would play, I don't think I had the opportunity to see if someone played differently because it would normally be how I would play. Because I felt more comfortable in situations that I could control what was happening. So I just kind of took the lead on it whenever I would play with friends.
And how about you, Dad? I mean, I know that the mother of my children would have a different level of intuition if they were, about their moods and the things they were thinking. And Dad's, to me, at least, it was much more physical prowess, was hanging out, playing, riding a bike. Did you notice, what did you sort of experience from this young phenom?
I definitely saw it differently than when Natalie saw it. Natalie is the one that would pick up on those things. So for me and Emma, our relationship was very much play, and it was very much be in a room, doing pretends, doing silly songs, doing those types of things. So for me, it was never really a recognition that there was something wrong. I always just said, oh, that's cool. I get to play with my daughter. Until Nat said, do you notice this? I would be the one to be like, nah, there's nothing there, right? Like, it's not like Sam. Without Nat, I don't think we would have gotten to the point where the diagnosis happened. If it were just up to me, Tony, it would have been, she's great. Like, she's got tons of energy for sports. She's doing all the things, right? It's kind of all the things of when, being 53 years old and back when I was a kid, just give us some Ritalin and go away. I almost would say I was probably autistic back then, and I still am. And so I don't feel the difference. I don't see the difference in my daughter. So now I do.
As you start coming to terms with the fact that you're getting this diagnosis and stuff, what advice can you give other parents? Because to me, the one thing about health is it changes your direction almost immediately in life, whether it's your health or someone that you love. How should parents open their minds to what they've been blessed with versus maybe sometimes close their minds because this is not what they expected? Does that make sense?
Okay, first of all, we were fortunate because when Emma got her diagnosis, it wasn't a surprise by then. And we had also dealt with Sam and with his diagnosis. So we had gotten the chance already to see how amazing he is. We started to see that autism, yes, it had a few challenges, but really it's amazing. The way their brain works is absolutely fantastic. And they don't get held back by so many things. So when we got Emma's diagnosis, first of all, it didn't change who she is. And that was something that I thought was really important. And that's one of the things they told us when they gave us the diagnosis. They said, don't forget, you've known her for all of her life. You've loved her. You've taken care of her. You've met her needs. And just because you have a diagnosis now doesn't change who she is. It doesn't change what you know about her already. All that does is help you to help her to thrive.
How important is that mindset? Because you approach it with, this is an amazing mind. There's some challenges, but how important do you think that is for not just people that love people that are in their family that are autistic, but society in general to start thinking about it that way?
Given the society and we're trying to be as inclusive in everything from, all the different communities to people with autism to, all those other aspects. So for me, it's the acceptance and of who they are as a person and trying to make the environment as accepting and inclusive as possible for them to thrive. I mean, especially in a working environment, and Emma is in university right now and will be a teacher in the next 4 to 5 years. That's what I hope continues to happen, is that society and environments are very inclusive for minds such as Emma's.
Emma, we're going to get into, I love the fact that when the pandemic hit and you just decided you're not accepting status quo. And we're going to get into that. You're a fighter. I'm curious as to your point of view of, do you feel you have to go out of your way to be like other people? Or are you thinking society's now starting to realize that diversity is actually to everybody's advantage?
Well, I see that in terms of different cultural aspects. Like I've noticed like it's gotten a lot better and that people are starting to really just admire, for example, African-American hairstyles. They're starting to really admire the food of different cultures and they're starting to really see how important it is. I don't think that the same mindset is brought into disabilities. People tend to look at those that are different in that way kind of uncomfortably because of what they've been taught through norms of media, on TV shows, how it's shown, and that they don't really realize that there are people that are higher functioning on the spectrum, for autism example, that doesn't really show, but there are certain things that they have that's different from other people. So I find that if I don't mask it, people tend to be more hesitant with me. So I kind of learned quickly that I just kind of had to more react to what they were doing instead of them having to react to what I was doing. My social battery could be completely dead and you wouldn't know because I would know that I still needed to be interacting with someone because that's what they were doing to me.
When did you start that play acting? Does it ever get to the point where you're overwhelmed by it because you just want to have a bad day, or you just want to be tired, or you just want to, not be with people? When did you start making those moves so that you could meet people on their elevator floor versus, them not coming to terms with where you were? Does that make sense?
I didn't originally see my difference in terms of sociability or anything like that until I was 13, so grade 7 probably. That was kind of when I started noticing that people were making jokes or other things that I didn't understand, and I wasn't quite catching social cues. And that was when I was starting to see that aspect of my autism coming into play. And so I think that was kind of when I started to have to learn to pretend I understood the joke or to just kind of act like that. I think that's when it started. It's really come into play also in the workforce, because when you're a coach and you're talking to parents and you're talking to other athletes, you have to make sure that you're always on top of things because you're watching their kid or you're in charge of them. And so they have to make sure that they approve of what you're doing as well. So in that sense, it's important to mask it.
Do you ever just get overwhelmed because you have to put this suit of armor on every day to be like others, when you could just sometimes wish that if they only knew what was really going on in your mind, they would just be mesmerized by some of the things you're thinking about?
Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it. I never thought of it that way. I do definitely come home exhausted mentally a lot of the time, especially when I come from a long day at school, and then I would have practice and I'd have work. If I had all three of those in one day, I'd be pretty much done wanting to talk to people when I get home. I tended to put that suit of armor, like you said, on more in my sport aspect than at school, because at school I was in a music program, so I was able to be myself anyways, because that was a big part of who I was. But it was always when I got to cheer that I needed to put that on and act a bit differently, because I didn't want to affect the team's progress, because I thought I would.
So before we get into the cheerleading, which is such a big part of your life, were you ever in situations where you were bullied because you weren't what that other person deemed to be normal, or they thought they could take advantage of the fact that you might not be on the same bandwidth they were? So
I went to a kindergarten to grade 8 school. So I was with that group of kids my entire school career up to that point. So even when I started noticing my differences in grade 7, they didn't see them because they were already they've already been with me for a lot of years. So it didn't really come into play. But then I think when I changed schools and I got into high school, it was a little bit different. It did kind of go together with when I started a higher level of cheerleading that so happened to be my first year of high school, which also changed how I looked at being bullied. I would actually notice it and I would actually care. So in grade 9, some of the guys in my class, I was really smart. And so I would speak up. I would be respectful to the teacher. I would always answer questions because that's how I was taught. The guys in my class would bully me. And compared to in elementary school, when I would just brush it off, or I would tell them off and say, like, that's not okay. I would kind of just take it. I let it go on for 4 years.
And mom and dad, what's happening with your life? You know, you're watching your daughter and, you know, up until grade 8, sounds like she's running the classroom like she ran the home and ran play with her friends. And she gets to high school, it's a very different world because people don't have the same context. And is it a natural thing for parents to be overprotective in this situation? Or did you feel that maybe the best strategy was she's going to have to figure out her life in the real world, we'll let her figure it out in high school?
We were really fortunate because in high school, she was in this small special program, and the teachers all knew who she was. They knew what her strengths were. They knew what her needs were. So we didn't really have to intervene very often. There was a teacher that was assigned to all of the students on the spectrum at the school. So we could reach out to her if there was an issue. And then she would speak to Emma, and Emma was really good at speaking to adults about what was going on. So then she got help. It wasn't as easy outside of school.
Yeah.
Outside of school was where it was much more difficult because Emma went from being this person who was so confident and capable of advocating for herself, and she knew who she was and she was happy with who she was and all of that. And then it was related to cheer, unfortunately. Cheer had always been so good for her until then as well. And it all kind of happened at the same time. She changed schools and went on a higher level of cheer. Then on that cheer team, she was being mistreated and bullied by not just athletes, but adults there too. And then that affected her in high school. That made it so that she couldn't advocate for herself anymore.
Let's go!
It's the 10th edition. Top of smoke invasion. That's how we ride. Bullets.
Let's get into cheer. You're one of the best in the world. How did cheer first come about? And for the audience that often sees it as sort of this entertainment within a sporting event or something, just share with us why this will become an Olympic sport and how much it meant to you.
So the story that was always told to me for when I was really little, because I started when I was 5, was that I was really outgoing and that gymnastics took too much weighting for me. So my mom got told about cheerleading, and so she put me into cheerleading because it was very, a sport for someone who was outgoing. For people that aren't quite aware of the aspect of elite cheerleading and all-star cheerleading versus sideline cheerleading, one way that I've always explained it to people that have asked me is that it's kind of a mix of dance, gymnastics. I say weightlifting, but it's just because we lift people up. But acrobatics. I think it's just kind of a mix of a lot of it. We do keep some of the traditional aspects of sideline cheer in terms of the showmanship or performance, trying to be as clean as we can. So we're making sure our motions look right. We do the dance aspect. We do the lift aspect. It's just not for entertainment. It's for sport. It's extremely difficult. I remember winning so many arguments with people who said, oh no, it's not hard. It's not that dangerous. And I'll pull up Google and they'll say cheerleading is the second most dangerous sport in the world. And I kind of nod my head. I'm like, yeah, that's true.
And Dad, what started off is something for her energy and athletic ability. She's climbing the ranks. It sounds like that the further you got, there'll be more people competing for those positions. We know how often in sports, when you get to be an elite athlete, it's the parents that exhibit the worst behavior. First of all, that's not the behavior you ever want to see any coach or parent give to any kid that's just trying to do their best. But your kid's got autism. So how does Dad react to all of this? The fact that you have a world caliber athlete in the home, but at the same time, that suit of armor that's carried her this far seems to be falling off her.
So for me, it's extremely difficult to watch because I coach at an extremely high level for baseball. I have autistic kids as a coach. I treat them like everybody else. I recognize their environment and what they need, but it's almost that suck it up and you're an elite athlete and you need to perform at a high level. So for me, it was really difficult this is my baby girl whose armor is broken, as you said. And people are not giving her the opportunity to be able to be her best self within a sport that she loves. As a coach, I knew I hated it when parents interfered. And so that part of it, of me, I think Natalie and I as parents, we would have tussles about that. Like, I'm like, well, you can't really interfere, Nat, because, you know, it's an elite world-class level now. However, at an emotional level with Emma in the car and different things, I would give her strategies to be able to work with from my experience in competitive sport. So it's different from a dad's perspective because you really you want to protect. But at the same time, you still don't want to let her lose that competitive edge that she has.
And Natalie, I could see your jaw tightening a couple of times when you're remembering these points. How does a mom react? Because it's got to be like, you know, we all dream of a level playing field where the best athletes have an opportunity to be the best. And yet when that's not the case, or somebody's trying to pull somebody else down, not because of their athletic ability, but trying to find some vulnerability, it's got to be tough on a mom.
Probably the worst thing you could do to me is hurt my child. It was particularly hard because, as I said before, Emma used to be able to advocate for herself and she felt confident. She felt that she was a good person and all of that. And so when the difficulties started, I could see the change in her. And it was so hard to watch because it felt like there was nothing we could do about it. We tried to, role play with her, talk to her, brainstorm, come up with ways to help her to let people know what was happening. And it wasn't working. Her confidence was just like reducing and reducing. So that was so hard to watch.
You became quite famous in the pandemic because you refused to accept the fact that some sports were allowed to continue to train, and yet they considered your sport an easy political football to say that shouldn't be something that we can practice. And I would have to believe that competitive cheer is pretty difficult to do virtually. Tell us how you decided that this was not going to be acceptable. And did it help you maybe with your confidence, the fact that people started really listening to you?
Yeah, I remember that time. It was really hard for me. I was at home, and the way that we would work was that our coaches would send us kind of a Zoom link, and we'd be on the Zoom call for the time that our practice normally would be at, so that we'd still have like our endurance, but it would just be like, they'd be on the phone and they'd be telling us, okay, you need to do 20 sit-ups, you need to do this. And it wasn't actually like do any cheer. It was just a workout every single time. And so it wasn't really doing any of my sport. Like I would go out on the trampoline and I would do some of my tumbling just to like keep up my stamina, but that was all I could do. And it was getting to the point where I was getting like, my mental health wasn't good either because I wasn't doing that physical activity that I needed. Then there were a few sports that were allowed to start practicing. I remember one of my friends who played rugby, football, and lacrosse. He started doing his lacrosse again with a mask and like with regulations. And so I got super excited. I was like, oh, great, we're going to get that message soon that we're going to get to start practicing. And then our coaches explained that we weren't going to be reopening, and I was confused. And then I kind of got more information, and they said because in Ottawa and Ontario, cheer wasn't considered a competitive sport. It was considered a recreational activity. It's definitely not a recreational activity. I've hurt myself a lot of times doing this recreational activity. I was starting to get really frustrated because I knew that it was a sport. I knew that it was way harder than people were saying, and that it deserved to be practiced again because athletes can't be taking that long of a break. And so I started reaching out to different radio shows and different news outlets just to explain like that this should be recognized and that this should be something that's reopened, because there are so many athletes sitting at home watching other people get to start practicing their sport again, being told that what they do isn't as important as what other people are doing. And my 7th and 8th grade English teacher was the one who kind of showed me how important the written word is, like how much a letter can do, how much just advocating for something can do. And so I decided to try and advocate for it. And I got to do those shows to just kind of talk about what cheerleading is for me. And it paid off, and we got to go into the gym and practice. It wasn't our full sport capacity, but it was definitely, we were in the gym. We got to start doing our tumbling again. We weren't allowed to do the stunting aspect, so the lifts, but it was still, we were with our teammates. We were starting to practice at least half of it. So it made me feel really good because I knew that I had done something that changed my life and that changed the lives of my friends.
Did it change how you thought about yourself, that you, in fact, you could be part of changing society for the better? Do you ever think of it as that important, or no, I'm just happy I got us back in the gym?
I didn't at that point think about like the social, like the society changing aspect of it. I was just kind of happy that I could be out of the house and be doing something with my friends again. I do think like now that I look back at it, that was the end of my first high level season. So we didn't actually get that full first season. So it was in the start of of my second year in that level. And so for me, it kind of impacted me because it allowed us to practice and then actually compete that season instead of probably having to wait another full season before doing it again. But I get to look at it now and say I probably wouldn't have been at the level I'm at now if I had to wait even longer, because I wouldn't have been able to progress further. Your
team, I believe it's the World Championships and you win the silver medal.
Yes, last year.
And you're very close to winning gold.
At Worlds, the way it works is there are two competition days. So the first one, you're basically competing against everybody that's in your division in your country. So we were 12 Canadian teams in the category that I was in last year. So on the first day, you're competing only against them. And then what happens is the top 3 from each country get to go to the second day. So we ended up being one of those 3. And the way that works then is you compete against everybody that made that final day. So from the UK, we had someone from Brazil, we had people from Australia, you get to then go against them. And then that's brought into the final ranking. So for us on the first day, we were actually world champions. On the first day, we had the highest score in Canada and in the world. However, on the second day, we dropped by, I think, 2 points. 2 points. And so then the other team was ahead of us by that. But this was really cool because in Ottawa, the highest placement that had ever been won at that point was bronze. So we made history for how high we placed, which was super surprising because we hadn't actually won any of our competitions that we were against anybody the entire year. So we went into Worlds with no expectations. We went in with a mindset of we're going to do our best. Our goal is just to hit our routine, so no mistakes. We did that. It was amazing because at the beginning of the year, we actually weren't even enough to compete. We were a really small team and there were people that came in. And so then we managed to have just enough people to compete. And because we were that small of a team, our bonds were super, super tight. So none of us felt like we were competing against each other. None of us felt like one would go behind the other's back. We were all there for each other. And I think that really helped us kind of with that team dynamic going forward to keep reaching our goals.
This beautifully tight-knit team, you're bringing in, people along the way, you're assembling it. You go into the next year and you get injured.
It was a normal team practice. We were doing some repping. We were just practicing one of our tumbling passes that we do close to the beginning of the routine. For people who are technically aware of what this skill means, it's a round-up handspring full. For those who aren't, it's basically a backwards flip with a 360 twist in the air, landing on feet. And it's a skill that I've had for 4 years. So it was pretty simple for me to keep, I was throwing it a lot. We were doing a lot though, so I was really tired. We got into the point where I landed on my feet, but I kept twisting. And so my knee unfortunately dislocated and then relocated. And then I was unable to walk. I had to go to the hospital. I was out for a really long time. At that point, I was watching my team practice instead of actually practicing because I wasn't able to.
How hard was that for you to sort of the reality of this, this team that was so tightly knit, that you were so part of setting this record, that you're on the sidelines with a knee? Because I have to believe that that's got to be one of the worst things to hurt if you're in competitive cheer is your knee.
It took us a while to actually finally get a diagnosis of what was wrong with it. Fortunately, it wasn't anything that would end my career, but it was really scary and just kind of disappointing to have to sit and watch especially because I knew that was someone that could do my position. Like it wasn't like they were anxiously waiting for me to get better. It's kind of like I knew then that my season would change from that, even if I could get better.
When you're finally physically capable of getting back, the doors weren't as wide open as they should have been.
I knew personally that when I was injured, I knew that I wouldn't be able to go back and do, like, for example, that skill again, probably for a while, given that it was hard for me to do most things for the first few months. Given the fact that the team was bigger, I knew that I wouldn't be given the same opportunity necessarily because I hadn't been practicing for a really long time. Honestly, yeah, I wasn't put back in the same position. Now I'm just not currently on a team. So I'm waiting for the next season to start to explore different options and find out like a team that works for me, that accepts me, that just overall is good for my mental health and good for everything around me. So currently I'm in a little bit of an in-between stage.
And there's teams that are interested in you.
Yes.
Do you think it's going to continue to be as important to you as it was back then? Because you've also got your music, your teaching, university, all sorts of the other things that you're doing. Do you think it's going to be one of your North Stars?
I definitely still have that like hope of winning worlds. I've learned through this experience that I need to kind of look at other aspects of my life as well, because I put cheerleading like really high up on a pedestal, whereas like if I had a bad practice, my entire mood would be changed. Like even if I had the best day ever at school and like I had a performance with my band and it went really well, if I went to practice and it was bad, that was what I would be affected by, not the fact that I had an amazing musical performance. It was all dependent on if I did well with my team, if I was performing well for cheerleading. And I didn't really see that. My mom did, and she kind of like tried to maneuver me to like think about, look, you did this amazingly with music, or look, you got a really good grade in school. But I would constantly go back to, but cheerleading's like what I'm doing. I think moving forward, it's still going to be important to me because it's a sport I've been doing for almost 14 years. I think I've learned that I need to also think that I have so many other talents and things in my life that are important. And so I've been putting my music ahead of most things now, which has been really good. I get to do a choir, like I was in choir for university, and I actually get to perform at the NAC next month. I make sure that I take every opportunity I have to hang out with friends that I wouldn't normally hang out with. I'm volunteering at my church, and I'm taking up more shifts at work because I love coaching there. They're super accepting, and it's the best job I've ever had. I've definitely recentered my life.
Has it changed the way you thought of the type of team you want to be in, given your experiences with the other one?
Yes, I definitely put like skill level to importance because I am competitive and I do want to do well. However, I've leaned away from it, seeing what can happen when teams do really well, where it's just put into importance of how I do, like you need to win, your skill level is important. I've changed it into more of the fact of, yeah, winning's obviously great, but if my mental health is plummeting because of it, was that worth it? So I put into a lot more importance how the people are at the gym, not necessarily how their scores look, though it is important. I've made it a point to know how they treat their athletes, how the athletes treat each other, how I would be treated in that situation. Otherwise, it's not happening.
So, Mom and Dad, I'm going to ask you a tough question. It must have been the hardest thing in the world, obviously, to see your daughter injured and not getting her shot that she so rightfully deserved. But do you think this is overall this is probably one of the best things that's ever happened to her, because she's got this new outlook in life, that she's got diversity in her life and saying it's not just cheerleading. It's my music. It's my volunteering. It's my making time for friends. How do you look at it?
Yes and no. I think that I'm really happy that Emma's been able to change her mindset. I think that's really great. And I really hope that she will continue that way, because she really does have a lot of gifts and talents. And I think she needs to remember that, because she did lose that. and really felt like she wasn't as valuable as everyone else. And so that was really hard to see. Like, I'm not happy that it happened because she really went through a lot of anguish, and so did we. And there were a lot of tears, and there were a lot of times where I didn't know how we were going to help her to get up the next day.
Yeah, I would never imply you were happy that it happened, but just listening to how you sound, it's just interesting that she's got a very mature outlook on life that just sort of says there's other things in life than just one thing.
Yeah, and I'm so proud of her for that. She's amazing. She impresses us every day with how she approaches things. And one of the things that I think is really good was that through this situation that we had where she ended up leaving the team, she was able to use something that we've used with her from the time she was little. If you're upset, if something bad happens, try and find someone to help. And she's really embraced that. And that's her reason for wanting to do this, because she really wants to make a change in the cheer world, because we've identified a problem. So she's not just going to sit back and say, that was awful what happened to me, poor me. She's saying, that was awful what happened to me. I want to make a change.
And Brian, I mean, you're driving around with a trunk full of baseball bats. I mean, like, it must have been very hard for you knowing how much you're vested in sports, because you understand what it means when someone has a dream.
Yeah.
And they're going after that dream and they're committed to that dream. How did you cope?
Yeah, being from the competitive world, and obviously for me, I've had several dreams, and I still do. So, playing baseball was, hey, can I make the major league someday? That got hurt because I got hurt when I was 16, 17 years old. So for me, when we found out what we did, and that Emma was no longer on the team, how can I fix this? How can I advocate for my daughter? What platform do I have? Because I know how to use the platforms to try to advocate for what happened to my daughter. And so how do I try to fix it or help her raise her voice? As she said, her dream's not over. As a father, that's all I can ask for, is that my daughter's happy, that she's moving forward, and whatever I can do to help whatever this next journey is in her life, I will do.
Are you ever, I mean, this is going to sound so lame for you that does this day in and day out, but I looked at the videos and I've seen what you're doing. Are you ever scared out there? Because you're doing some really, for the average person, they look incredibly dangerous, some of the things you're doing out there.
It's scary when you first start out doing it. So it could be at the beginning of a season when you first learn how to do a new skill. When it's new, it's scary. When you're learning how to do something, yes, because you know that I know the risks. I know I can get hurt doing it. I've seen that I can get hurt doing it. I've seen other people get hurt doing it. But because of how practices work in terms of you're doing the same thing over and over again, perfecting it, you kind of lose that fear because you've done it so many times that you just assume that it's going to be fine because it's been okay. So with the amount of practice that gets put into it, I'm not afraid of doing it when I do it because I've done it so many times before that. When I'm performing, my fear is more like, oh, is this not going to work? Is this going to fall? Is this going to not go the way it did in practice?
And do you think your autism, where has it helped you be a better athlete? And is there areas where you've really had to work to overcome things because your brain factors in things differently?
I tend to hyper-focus on things, and that's actually helped me and caused me problems. One way is because I'll focus on a particular skill until it looks what it's supposed to look like. So I'll be very laser focused on getting a particular skill, and that's all I'll be doing. I want to understand everything there has to do with what I'm doing. That came up for me with TV shows and movies too. I'll go to the movie theater, I'll watch a movie, I'll have the entire soundtrack downloaded by the end of the movie. I'll know where that actor was in the first and wherever they were when they started their career. It's the same idea. However, I questioned some decisions that people on my team were making or that my coaches were making because I was like, oh, but that could be better because I've read this somewhere. And then that got me into trouble because I'm obviously, you don't question the authority that you have.
But you've been questioning authority since you were,
yes.
And how about trust? Because part of the sport you're in is you have to trust people are going to catch you and lift you properly. Has trust ever been an issue for you?
Since I was little, I always assumed that my interest was being put first in terms of like the coaches, or like that they cared like for the team that they were coaching. My teammates, we were always super close. My coaches always cared for me. And then when I got to the elite levels, there, like the competitive aspect got like, I think, put into too much importance, and the people were less of the importance, more as the results that they were producing. So I started losing my trust. I've been wrestling with this thought for a few weeks of like, how am I going to ever trust the people that are in charge of me again? How am I going to trust my teammates, because I lost it because of what had happened?
When we return, Emma asked me to record a further segment of the show, something I rarely do. But she had something to say about the team that refused to let her play. Hi, this is Tony Chapman, host of the radio show and podcast Chatter That Matters. Did you know that only 1 in 5 youth with a mental health illness can get access to the care they need? Well, a big shout out to the RBC Foundation and RBC Future Launch for supporting over 150 youth mental health organizations. And in doing so, they help youth and their families get the care they need and deserve.
It seems like society has been made to look at people that are different, that don't fit inside the box, as less valuable, less important, less competent, less capable. And first of all, if we can be comfortable knowing that's going to happen, so we can insulate ourselves by knowing what's amazing about our children and find people that are going to appreciate them as much as we do, or close, I think that'll help the entire family to survive when it's like that. I think we can advocate for people in the world to stop expecting everybody to fit inside a box, and to stop saying, unless you are like this.
You're listening to Chatter That Matters with Tony Chapman, presented by RBC.
So this is a little out of the ordinary, but how could I ever say no to the extraordinary mind of Emma Beehler? She reached out after we recorded the session and asked if she could come back on to explain more about how she sees her world. So this is what Emma had to say, and then we'll dive back into my conversation with Emma and her parents, and of course my 3 takeaways. So Emma, let's talk about the times when you felt unaccepted and less valued, either on your team or in a group. What did it look like? What did it feel like? And maybe what lessons can we learn from it?
Over the years, I've had multiple times when at first I didn't notice that I was being undervalued, but now that I look back on it, I definitely was. And recently as well, a lot of the time people saw more the symptoms of my disability rather than who I was as a person. And then they treated me that way instead of treating me just for a regular person and who I was. So basically, whenever I'd be around people, it basically felt like a heightened social anxiety almost. I was like I felt like people were annoyed by my presence. They wouldn't answer my questions because they felt like I was asking too many, because that's what I do when I get nervous and when I'm in a situation that doesn't work for me. Like, I ask questions to make sure that I'm comfortable. I basically felt incompetent rather than like when I was younger, how I felt very like gifted and very like open and very exceptional, I felt. But then now I felt very incompetent in those situations and less important than the ones that didn't have autism. It kind of made me less socially aware. So I would overthink social situations more. And it just caused me to then, even just in my regular relationships in my life, overthink everything I was saying and doing. It almost heightened my symptoms of autism, even though they are not normally super apparent. So when I tell people that I have autism, they're surprised because they think of like common symptoms that people have where it's like they're either nonverbal or they just can't communicate. And they're like, well, you can talk and you're fine with me. And I say, yeah, that's just because I'm high functioning and it's how it works. But now I find that I'm almost overthinking if I'm being quote unquote autistic in that sense.
There's going to be a lot of people listening that might not be where you are in terms of, you say, high functioning and autistic, but there's a lot of insecure people that I would feel this is going to relate to, because they start feeling like they're on their back feet and they're getting pushed back and they don't feel like they belong and they feel like they're awkward. So they go into their little shell. And I think that what you're saying is so important, that, you know, if people just saw you as a human being and realized that everybody's brain is different, and we met people like you in the middle and actually said, I'm going to celebrate all these questions because it's an interesting way to look at something, versus I'm going to challenge all these questions because you're different than me. I think that's an incredible lesson in life.
I remember, like I said, when I was younger, I definitely would not have related to the people that you're mentioning, just because I was like, oh, that's cool. My brain's different. Like, that just makes me even cooler of a person. Like, I was very open about it. And I said what I understood about my disability, and I didn't see it as a disability. I just saw it as something cool about me. But now because of the way I've been treated in certain situations where I've been just put down and not communicated to properly and not given the proper accommodations I needed, it's like really made it more evident to me that my symptoms could affect me. And I think that, yeah, people who even don't have autism, who are just naturally not as socially competent, it depends on the person. I think that if they were just treated with like a certain amount of, not necessarily dignity, but respect, knowing who they are as a person, it would probably make them feel a lot more comfortable talking to people in general and not having to feel like they're doing something wrong or like they're overthinking something. Being given the help I needed and just being felt like I was understood and that I was a normal human being would have really helped me in those situations and probably wouldn't have made things worse.
You know, it's interesting because this switch goes from, as a kid, you kind of see it as something different and even a superpower. And then as you start getting thrown around like a pinball in a game with people that just, you know, refuse to understand or appreciate or accept, that you suddenly now, that becomes a super weakness. And it really is just a switch brought on not by you, not by your mental well-being, but by the circumstances you're in. And I just think that's, again, another lesson in life for all of us. Accepting is not something like you do because you're kind or, gee, you're a generous person, but accepting is the middle ground that I think that if more humans stood on and looked at each other and realized that we're all different in different ways, I think we'd be a much better human race. And I think that's kind of one of the lessons I'm learning from you today.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I noticed, like, when because I'm a coach, I coach gymnastics. I will be coaching cheerleading. I find that, like, when we are made aware that an athlete is on the spectrum, or I could suspect that they may have something that's different about them, I don't approach it almost scared because I know how I would have wanted to be treated. And so I make sure I give those athletes the same amount of like encouragement. And if they need communications, I'll answer their questions. I try to make sure that they can progress at the same speed and at the same like level as the other kids in their classes, even if they're younger, just because that way I don't push them off from the experience of the sport that they're trying to learn. And just like in my regular everyday life, I'm an emergency ECE. So I help out at different schools in kindergarten. And I make sure that I'm looking at the kids in a way that looks at all of them the same so that they grow up with that same feeling.
So what other lessons in life do you have? I mean, you're providing some great context as both a coach and a teacher and someone that's seen what happens when you might be attacked or challenged. What lessons in life would you give so that other people like you can succeed and society's there to provide a hand up versus maybe push you back?
Mm-hmm. So I think that one of the most important things is definitely communicating your needs. I know that there will always be people who refuse to then accommodate them, but always going head in saying, I have a difference about me. This is something I need. This is what will help me. Never be afraid to accommodate for yourself, because once you've done that, if they don't accommodate you, that's their problem, not yours. Also, there will be people a lot of the time who don't necessarily see you for the things that you do well, but will then see you for the things that you do not as well. So in those situations, I know it's hard because it takes a big hit on your self-esteem and everything like that. Try to, when you get home, or just like have someone like a mom or a dad or just anybody at home that can be there and be like, hey, what did you do well today? And then you can list off the things that you did well, because I've had the experience where I've been constantly just put down for the things that I was doing wrong. Even I could do 10 things right, but the one thing I did wrong was what was being focused on. And just not getting that encouragement and not getting that satisfaction of a coach or a parent, or not even, no, my parents always tell me that, a coach or an authority figure, just saying, great job, you did a good job, would have helped me so much in those situations. So I think that I had to learn to be my own cheerleader in a sense, like, yes, you did that well. And that's something to focus on, because otherwise you'll go into the rest of your life kind of, say you're doing a homework assignment and you'll focus on all the things you did wrong instead of the other 20 pages you did right. And it really takes a toll on you. So you really have to try and focus on the silver lining rather than the things that went wrong.
What message can you give to the world? I know that sounds very lofty, but the more we're open-minded to everybody's mind, the better we'll be.
I think that through this experience, in terms of group aspects, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, that there's been a lot of stereotyping in terms of autism and how it is as a disability. And people only see that there's like a low functioning system where like they'll see like the ones that are nonverbal, the ones that are violent, the ones that don't interact like well with other people, but they don't understand that there's a spectrum. They don't understand that having this disability isn't only the stereotyping that they've seen. Like, it's also the fact that a lot of us are incredibly smart. Like you mentioned Einstein at the beginning. Where would we be without those different theories?
Thomas Edison. I mean, some of the most amazing, brilliant thinkers.
Exactly. So I think that they embraced what they had, but people don't say, oh, like they were autistic and that's why that happened. People are looking at it and saying, despite the fact that they were autistic, it happened. What should be happening is they should say, because they are autistic, they figured that out. Because I think that a lot of people are looking at it as an obstacle. And yeah, it is an obstacle for certain things, but it's also one reason that like so many creative thinkers and so many different inventions have been invented. It's because their brain works differently. And I think that if people just learn or are more educated on it and just learn to see that, yeah, they're different from me, but that could mean that they produce an amazing outcome or different outcomes. And what would that look like if I worked with them instead of trying to work around the disability? I work with the disability.
What do you see you're going to be? I want to hear from you first, and then I'm going to end the show with my prediction of what might be a very different gold medal for you in the future. But what's the next 5-10 years going to be for you that you're going to look and say, I'm in a great place mentally, physically, my journey in life?
Yeah, I think that I want to almost go back to the mindset I had when I was younger of I'm the way I am and that's okay. Like, I know I'm in university for music and second language teaching because I want to be in that world of music. And so I know that I'm not always going to be an athlete. I'm not always going to be in that world, but like I've chosen to help people. And I think that that's where I want to be. I want to be helping people, whether it be at a school teaching or whether it be at home, just helping people give like private lessons, things like that. I want to be able to be seen as someone who helps people. That's my biggest goal. I think that that's what I would see.
If you had a magic wand, because that's what you're working and campaigning for, what changes and how soon?
Things that I've learned is that athletes need to be protected. Something that not a lot of people know is that not every cheer gym is part of like a national organization or like, so for us, it's Cheer Canada. That's the big one. And then there's OCF, which is Ontario Cheer Federation. There's a lot of different federations. I thought at first that every single cheer gym had to be affiliated with those organizations because those organizations, their goal is to protect the athletes. I recently found out that not every gym is affiliated with those organizations. And it kind of scared me because I was like, so if I am in one gym that isn't affiliated, I'm not protected. And so what are we supposed to do when something goes wrong and someone's not being treated fairly? You can't go to those organizations because they're not affiliated with the gym. So I think that one thing that I would want to see change is that it needs to be mandatory that every gym has an affiliation with a national organization because athletes need to be protected in the sport that they're doing. Parents need to be comfortable putting their kid in a sport knowing that they have someone advocating for them and not against them. All coaches that are working with children and young adults should have to have some form of equity and inclusivity training. I also want to see it to become like commonly expected practice that when any coach becomes aware of any differences like mine or a need for accommodations on their team, that they would have access to resources and training that better help them to deal with it. But also coaches should be reminded their parents can be a valuable resource as well, because I know that through my sports, a lot of the time coaches are focused on the team and they want to do well. So they don't really like interacting with parents. I think my dad said earlier that parents can be
Get in the way.
Yeah. But I think they do need to be seen as also like a valuable resource because they know their kid. They know how to better help them. And I just want to change the culture in terms of how it's seen in the cheer world so that all athletes with like required skills for elite levels can be accepted and valued for those things, not how they are mentally, but also like because they have that skill, they have a personality. Just because they have a disability doesn't change the fact that they have that skill. They should belong either way because they've proven that they can compete at the exact same level as all the other people on their team. And it doesn't change because of one thing that's different in their brain.
What advice do you give to other parents who either find out that they have a child is autistic or that within their circle of friends, someone has an autistic child and deserves to have friendships and community just like theirs does?
You know, when you first get your diagnosis, you're going to be kind of overwhelmed, right? Oh my gosh, what is my child's life going to look like? And that kind of thing. But because you've known them and you already love them and you already really know what they need, that doesn't change. So what you need to do is just focus on the good things that you know about your child. Focus on their strengths, focus on the things that make them amazing rather than focusing on the challenges, because you're going to need that so that you can be encouraged when there are challenges. And your child's going to need to feel good about themselves when they're encountering challenges. So if you focus on developing their strengths and their gifts, you're almost immunizing them against the bad things that could happen to them because of their disability. I think that if we can talk to people and help them to start realizing that every single person has a contribution to make to this world, every single person is valuable, and if everybody were the same, so many things wouldn't have happened that are good. We wouldn't, like, life would be boring. There would be so much we would be missing out on. And if we could start realizing that we need every single person and the contribution they have to make, I think the world would be a better place, and we wouldn't have to keep coming up with another group that needs help and support, that needs to say, hey, stop treating us like we're not as valuable as you are.
I always end my show with my 3 takeaways. And my first is the 3 of you are an incredible family unit. Listening to you and watching how each looks at each other and nods and stuff, there's an incredible amount of love that radiates in terms of, you know, you had 2 children that society could say were very different, but you both are very proud of because you go, they're different, yes, because they're exceptional. And not everybody's exceptional. And the second thing is I just really love when you sort of said, here's how I'm seeing my life and prioritizing it different. And it's tough because I've had a lot of world champions and Olympians on my show. And once you're committed to be a world champion, that's all you're focused on. You finish your sport, you realize I didn't have the high school. I didn't have the friends. I didn't have the experiences others did because I was in the swimming pool or I was playing on the tennis court. And it's really interesting that you've had that ability to both chase a gold medal at a world level and at the same time you now have a perspective that says there's more to life. Because I think a lot of athletes, when their career ends very suddenly, they create a vacuum they don't know how to fill. And sometimes it takes them a decade. But the third thing that I'm going to go out on a limb and saying, and I hope you come back on the show in 5 years, I think you're on this planet for a very different reason than winning a gold. You are a change agent. You proved it through your entire life that you love to be that sense of setting the scene, setting the table. You proved it through the pandemic by refusing to accept that the ignorance of people that didn't realize you're a competitive sport. And the fact that you're trying to advocate change within your sport, I hope that you continue to use your voice, the written word that your English teacher taught, the music that might turn into a song, but open people's minds to the fact that diversity isn't just acceptance. Diversity is a strength. And the more that you can remind people by sharing your perspectives on life, I think the better society is going to be. we're going to be reading and listening and hearing about you for many years to come. And I think it's going to be more than just for a trophy you have on a mantle. I think it's going to be because you're opening minds to beautiful minds.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Chatter That Matters has been a presentation of RBC.
It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening. Let's chat soon.